Hi, welcome to Preps Plus Podcast, episode 42. I'm Josh Hart, sports editor here at the Daily News. I'm here with Jason Leskew, our Preps reporter. And we're here to discuss a few different topics. We'll start off with discussing our all-area Player of the Year selections. One, a pretty much lock as far as the softball Player of the Year went, and the other one, a very, very close race for the Player of the Year, and a very, very difficult decision. And then we'll discuss a couple of the other topics that's on the WIAA's mind and those around the state, as far as how classifications are determined and how playoff football seeding is determined. So we'll start off with the All-Area Softball Player of the Year. Story comes out in Saturday's paper. Hopefully you're watching this Sunday sometime. I think that's about when it'll come out. So you'll have had a day to read the story or so. Olivia Gray, undoubtedly our All-Area Softball Player of the Year. That was not too hard of a choice. Jason, you got to see her a few times this year. What did she do so well to earn that honor this year?
The big thing was she was able to change. She didn't have. There was not one pitch that was, just how some girls have a pitch, just strikeout guaranteed, just nasty movement, things like that. But she controlled her locations really well. She changed planes. Hitters had no clue where the ball was coming. But she did. It's one thing to be just kind of erratic, but she could, she could command the ball really well. She is a very intelligent person, and that shows in her pitching. She's able to utilize that intelligence in her pitching and just, just strike out. 69 hitters over 4 games. I know she had like 385 strikeouts in 175 innings or whatever this year, right. But striking out 69 batters in 4 games over the course of the state tournament. There's only 21 outs a game. In the championship, she struck out 19 of 21 outs. In the championship game, 23 outs in that one. Drop 3 strikes. Oh. So she had a couple, But yeah, I mean, and that's something that and I have to believe the WIAA may start keeping records after this year. That's something that they were not keeping track of. Gray and Tom Christensen were told by one of the tournament directors there, tournament personnel, that they're pretty confident that's a record.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'd be hard. Yeah. The averages on that are
84. Yeah, you got 84 total outs over 7 innings, 4 games. So it's to come within 15 of that.
That's just crazy. Yeah, she had a spectacular year. She's obviously been on the podcast before. She was a transfer from Kalama. Had to sit out last year on the JV, or she played on the JV squad for transfer rules, given that she still lives in Kalama, and so therefore has to sit out, or at least not play varsity for a year, and then she comes in. And man, that team is going to be a whole lot of fun to watch next year too. I mean, you go. I know a lot of it is pitching, but I have to give Tom Christensen a lot of credit to, I think, our coach of the year for all area, I think, if I recall right. Yeah. I don't have the list in front of me, but to go from 6-15 to state champions in a year, and I know a lot of that is pitching, but that team has just improved by leaps and bounds. I mean, you even just look at their hitting in the state tournament. Holy smokes.
Yep,
they had 10 home runs or something in 4 games. Everyone hit the ball well. Almost everybody returns on that team, minus 2. That team's going to be a lot of fun to watch next year. The thing I like about them, they named their state trophy Reggie. Have you seen this?
I was not aware of that, no.
Yeah, so they named the state trophy Reggie. And so
what's the?
I don't know. I just know it's on Twitter. Following around, they've named the state trophy. Seemed to be they had a lot of fun. We had a freelance photographer there. He captured some really cool shots of just kind of the atmosphere that the Beavers carried, or kind of the mindset the Beavers carried themselves with this season. And Yeah, Olivia Gray was a big part of that, and hats off to them. That's a stellar run, and hats off to Gray for Player of the Year. Our baseball one, much more difficult decision. Mm-hmm. Really, it comes down to two guys. Story comes out on Sunday in Sunday's paper. Saturday evening, it'll be up online. We went with Wahkiakum Zach Brown, All-Area Player of the Year. The number 2 guy, or I shouldn't even say number 2, 1B.
1A, 1B, yeah.
Kaden Vanderwerf. I feel really bad for not, for having to go with one of them. I really hate going with co-players of the year, so I try to push against that at every possible thing, and this year almost made me change my mind. Mm-hmm. You saw them both pitch. What makes them and hit? What made them so important to their teams this year? And in the end, why did we go with Zach Brown?
Well, we go with Zach Brown because there's a couple reasons. One is what he's managed to do over the past 5 years, and 5 years because he at Wahkiakum, a 2B school you can play as an 8th grader, and I just got off the phone with the coach there, Mark Niemeyer, and he summed it up, in his words, you can take Zach and put him on any other team, including teams like WF West with guys who were just drafted. You got sophomore, D1 guys, things like that. You put Zach Brown on any team, including WF West, and he's the best player on the team. That's a big compliment. I'm not going to stand behind that, but that's how the coach feels, right. And he's got a case to make. That's the big thing. He's got, Zach. The fact that someone could consider saying that, I think, about the guy right. says a lot. Right. This guy's a freshman, had a sub-2 ERA. As a sophomore, sub-2 ERA. No radar gun on him that I've seen this year, but it sure looks like he's throwing into low 90s at times. Hitting wise, came close to on-base percentage around 700. Intentionally walked several times by different teams. So there's just a ton of good things to say. Now Vanderwerf, this year was really
two-time GSHL MVP.
Yeah,
and this year probably his best year.
Oh, by far. 510 batting average. Was striking out 8 to 10 guys a game on a fairly regular basis. I think about the midway point of the season, teams stopped when Vandy was going to throw. Teams didn't throw their best guy, even if he may have been eligible and next in line there. They'd say, we're going to take the loss. We'll just tell you, he's just playing for the next game at this point, right? So yeah, it was tough. As Josh said, it was.
Yeah, Vanderwerf has been really interesting to watch him grow as a pitcher over the last few years. This is my 3rd year covering baseball in the area, and to watch him, he doesn't have overpowering stuff, but to watch him work the zone and force hitters into doing what he wants them to do. He's really smart with his pitches. This year he really improved as a batter. 510 batting average. Really grew as a hitter in that lineup, and was able to contribute in a lot of different ways, and I've just been really impressed with him. Of course, Zach Brown does very similar stats as far as kind of what they meant pitching and hitting to the team. I think what distinguishes Zach Brown over any athlete in the area, for me, is his leadership. I don't think anybody is the type of leader that Zach Brown means to that Wahkiakum program. Over all sports these past few years. This guy basically said, I don't want Wahkiakum sports to be in the cellar anymore. I don't want them to be looked down on. We're going to get in the weight room every day. We're going to work for a state title. And it might come and it might not, but we're going to put in the work, and we're going to change the name of Wahkiakum. And he's done a really good job of that. He's always He's always very charismatic in his leadership and knows how to push the buttons on his guys to make them perform at their peak. I don't think Wahkiakum baseball is anywhere near where it is now, and it's a disappointing thing they didn't win that state title, but I don't think they're anywhere even close without Zach Brown atop that group. And it does it in a lot more ways than on the field. And that's not to say Vanderwerf isn't a good leader or a good teammate. Totally is. I just have seen very, very few athletes in my time that have the leadership quality that Zach Brown has, and I know that'll translate well wherever in life he goes. I think he's going to Modesto Junior College for baseball, but whatever he does, I think he'll be really good at it just because of how much effort and time he can put into something. So it's a tough call. I know we'll get some negative feedback for it. That's kind of the name of the game. But like I said, I'm a really I really dislike co-players of the year. I think you can always find a reason to choose one or the other. So hats off to both of those kids. They certainly were both deserving of it this year. We had to go with one. Mm-hmm. So congrats to Zach Brown. Congrats to Kaden Vanderwerf as well. And yeah, that's part of the podcast is to hopefully explain that, because people will see the story, they'll see, and maybe not understand the thought process behind it. But we do take these things seriously. We put a lot of time into thinking about it, and everyone will have their own opinion. But we have seen, both teams play quite a bit this season. So that's it for the all area things. We'll quickly wanted to break down some of the new WIAA stuff that's come up. We'll start with this season. They're going to form committees. They're taking applications for it now to seed football teams. Mm-hmm. So rather than they had proposed RPI, they didn't like the way it would have seeded the teams over the past year. They kind of ran the numbers, and they didn't really like how it would seed them in football. They really, from what I've heard, WIAA really likes the way RPI's worked in basketball, and they're changing it. They're tweaking it each year, and so I think it'll get better. In football, they didn't like it, and I think that's fair over a small sample size. Yeah. So what has everyone always wanted? Human eyes, right? WIAA is going with human eyes. Forming a committee, there will be one that decides the 3A and 4A, one that decides the 2A and 1A, one decides that B schools. What are your thoughts?
Duh! I know, I'm so eloquent. People are looking. I think we got a guy walking. Yeah, we got a guy looking back like, what happened? That's my thoughts. I know. So eloquent.
It's like the college football playoff committee, except Condoleezza Rice, I'm guessing, isn't going to be part of any of these committees. Yeah, I think it's good. I think human eyes are the only way to tell high school football. The tough part will be getting people who are passionate enough to go track down film and watch. I mean, if you're doing college football playoff, you can get film and stats and anything on anyone.
Yeah.
It'll be a little bit different, trying to hunt down, especially for the lower classifications. If you're on the B committee, you're looking at Liberty versus Toledo. You're like, how do I distinguish, who is the better team? So the good news about it, it does not decide who gets into the playoffs. Teams still have to earn their way into the playoffs through their own district format. However, each district decides to do that, and then the committees get them, and they say, how should we seed these teams? I really like it. I think human eyes are the only way to look at high school teams, and if coaches are open and getting film to these committee members and they're passionate about doing it, and there are a lot of people who dedicate a lot of time for free tracking this stuff. You look at Rylan Spencer, you look at Scorzar, you look at a lot of these guys, and I'm sure there are many more but those are the first two that pop in my head, that go to these games and they track these things, and they're not getting paid to go watch the football game. They're going and traveling places because they care about high school football in the state, and they want to see how teams accurately match up with each other. I think it's a really good thing. I think there are enough people passionate about it to fill these committees, and that they'll be they'll try to get it right as close as possible, and I think it's better than any other system.
The one caveat is, there will then become a centralized video, film, I don't know, a database. I don't know how that would happen, but there's going to be the occasional, the teams like Nacelle, where you're way out in the boonies, and you don't have a huddle because, you're way out in the boonies and it just doesn't work that well, right? So, or another kind of internet-based replay setup. So it poses small problems, probably for a few schools. It's a problem for a few schools, but I'm curious. The one small thing, and it's a minor thing. This is getting probably too deep into it, but if someone starts to feel like, oh well, this person has a tie with this school who my team is going to play in the state semifinal, and whatever. Right. So can I trust this? This film.
There are going to be regional biases. We see all our teams all the time, and we say, oh, they're really good at this X, Y, Z, and we kind of know them more intricately, and so you're going to have certain biases. I think if you get them spread out enough, I think it'll be really good. Like I said, I think B schools are going to be the most problematic, but I think anybody who watches enough B football can go look at last year's bracket and go, hey, maybe Adna and Kalama are not the teams that should be meeting in the first round. Maybe that would be more like a semifinal matchup. I think there's obvious things that human eyes can pick up on, rather than the random draw and rather than the RPI over a small sample size. Yeah. The other interesting change affects classifications. There are a couple proposed things in this plan that they're still waiting on approval from, but some of them include classifications based on economic factors. You would get a certain percent of your enrollment reduced or added on depending on how affluent or poor your community was. I think that's a really interesting, certainly if you're here's a good story from Nathan Joyce explaining it all from the Seattle Times. And a good line that kind of sums up this portion of it is, the change is meant to level a playing field that sees affluent communities with more resources to draw upon for athletic programs consistently achieve more success than poorer communities that often see less turnout for high school athletics. I think it makes perfect sense. Add something like that. They say Oregon, Ohio, and Minnesota all have added a modifier to these classifications, and none of them have said we made a mistake. I think it's a really good idea. Certainly, more well-off schools are going to have better advantages. When you're in a poor community, a lot of times you can't go play football or basketball because you have to go get a job to help support your family. You have to go bale hay or whatever it is to help support your family. You have to take care of your siblings so your mom can work a second job. There's a lot of things that go into this, and I think it's a good idea that they're at least thinking about this and how it affects. The other one, and I think one that 1A schools will certainly like the idea of.
No question.
The new plan also calls for private schools to have an automatic 30% increase on their enrollment number. Jason, thoughts?
So I brought my, I think this story sums things up pretty well. I brought my family to state volleyball. Now they were in the parking lot about the time that the semifinals comes around. I forget if it was, what school was it? It wasn't Davin. Maybe it was Davin. No, who was this? It was, the University Life Christian or whatever come up. But one of those private schools. And so my son, who's he's 3, says...
he's 3, but he's as tall as Jason.
He actually is 4 feet tall. He's a big kid. But, the volleyball players, these high school players, get off the bus, and my son says, "There's group. There's another group. It's a bus full of group." He got these private schools with, teams full of 6'3" girls on their volleyball teams. You look at the basketball programs. Private schools have an advantage that is certainly unfair to public schools, and that is they can bring in players from that 50-mile radius. I grew up a couple miles away from De La Salle High School, who brought in
California, not in Oregon.
Right. Who was able to bring in T.J. Carey, Maurice Jones-Drew, Tywan Jones, and a few others, all in the same. All those are guys all played in the NFL. About 70% of their team in 2003 or so went and played in the NFL, and because they could bring in guys from anywhere,
right?
And that's the nature. That's what private schools get is, it becomes an advantage that.
Yeah, and I think there's there are certainly private schools that recruit. I think there's also a misconception though. I don't believe every private school recruits. What I think happens is they build good programs,
sure,
right, and get good coaches. And then if you're a kid that wants to play volleyball, right, and you're in that 50-mile radius, and you're really good at volleyball and you want to get exposure, why wouldn't you go play for that team?
Sure, but the coaches and the teams also aren't saying no, which is, you know what I mean?
Right. But I like the 30%. I think that certainly it will affect some of the smaller private, because 30%, the smaller the number gets, obviously, the more it impacts them. Some of these smaller private schools that are just basically having teams to have teams, and their turnout is low, they're not really great athletic programs. They're going to be really affected if they have to bump up a level. Their turnout might suffer. I'm wondering if there's ways around that. Because really you're looking at maybe targeting 10 or 15 schools in the state with this, whereas, the other 30 private schools might not, it's not really, it's only hampering them.
Right.
So there's give and take to it, certainly, but I think in the end it's good for competitive balance for sure.
Yeah.
The other last thing in this proposal I found kind of interesting is instead of a even split for teams across classifications, so you know how right now there's 65 teams roughly in every classification, and it's all based on percentage. You want equal percentage of 1B teams, 2B teams, 1A classifications being fixed. So if you're above 1,300 kids, you're 4A. If you're above 900, you're 3A. If you're above 450, 2A, so on and so forth. And it's fixed. And then if you're just above that number, you could have 94 A schools and 20 1B schools, and then your state tournaments would be therefore affected by it. Mm-hmm. Any thoughts on a fixed versus a percentage-based classification?
I think that would be tough to keep up with, and not just even on the 4-year deal they have now, or if you're a 2A school in 2016, you're a 2A school until 2020. You got that.
They used to do a 2-year, and then now with a chance to appeal after 2 years.
Okay. Yeah, and my thing is the way it works now, having a percentage, you know that there's going to be X amount of schools in this division, as you said, 65 in one classification, 65 in another classification. Your leagues aren't constantly changing. I think if there was a fixed amount, the league would be dramatically affected, as would the state tournament, the districts in the state tournaments.
Yeah, that was interesting because they said, so if you had a classification with more than 85 schools, your state tournament would field 24 teams. If it was smaller, it'd field 20. If it was really small, then it would only field 8, so that it balances out how tough or easy it is to make a state tournament. And in that case, I just ask, why not just make it a percentage-based system then? Because you're still taking the same amount of percentage. You're trying to make it equally difficult or easy for everyone to get into the state tournament. Then why not just make it a fixed thing, and then everyone has the same state tournament? It's easier to form schedules that way.
I got an idea. We should just have a guy in a clown suit just go through a list and pick out the classifications.
But yeah, I don't agree with I think a percentage makes sense. Every state tournament bracket you can look at and it's the same from 4A through 2B. Sometimes 1B is different because there's only so many schools that offer a certain sport. But Yeah, that doesn't make sense to me. But the other stuff I like. So we'll see how this proposal kind of takes shape over the next few months. But yeah, so some good and bad things. And that's all we kind of had to talk about today. It'll be interesting to see kind of what we do over the summer with this podcast. We'd like to keep it going, get in a couple maybe roundtables, bring in some black bears maybe, maybe just athletes in their summer routine. We are gearing up for Football Mag too, so maybe bring in some of those kids. Exciting stuff happening here at the Daily News.
Super.
All right, that's it for episode 42 of the Preps Plus podcast. We will see you whenever we make a new podcast. Thank you.
Peace.